Aloha, everyone. Welcome to All Intuitive Conversation. I'm Felicia Miller Johnson, and I am excited to be connecting with my next guest, Fiona Tate. So, she is another person that I have not had a conversation with before. So, you will be encountering our first conversation here live as I learn more about her and she learns more about me. So, let's add Fiona. Aloha, Fiona.
Hello.
How are you today?
Very good, thank you. Very good.
Awesome. Welcome to the show. So I know you shared in the beginning you are calling in from New Zealand.
That's right. That's right. Believe it or not, it's the middle of summer over here in New Zealand. Although I've got my big woolly jersey on because it's actually cold and quite wet.
Well, summer, I think summer is probably my favorite season. So I would love that. Are you a native of New Zealand or are you like an expat or what's the story behind you in New Zealand?
No, no, I'm a natural born Kiwi.
Mm.
Lived here all my life. Yep, I wouldn't want to live anywhere else, to be honest, particularly with what's going on in the world. I'm quite happy staying right here in our nice little country.
Well, is so I'm assuming you're talking about like the whole pandemic kind of thing that's going on. Have they been handling that really well there, or are y'all separated a lot by land, or? Mhm.
Yeah, we're a bit yeah, we handled, I think, the first kind of part of it quite well. Basically, we've got a prime minister that did a good job of the first pandemic,
Okay.
or the first kind of phase of it. I'm not 100% convinced that she's doing such a good job now. But yeah, she definitely did well at the start. So I mean, we haven't got anywhere near the numbers that other people have been managing. Um, we just don't have that at all. And where I live, I actually live in a caravan in a rural community. So we and I do everything online. I do my best not to go out and see people anyway. So I'm quite happy just being in my own little world here and talking
Uh-huh.
to everyone on the rest of the world just on an online capacity. Yeah.
Yes. Well, when we talk about the pandemic, and there was a time where people say, well, like, what was like a good thing for you that happened? And I know for me, one of the things was like when you're doing coaching in this business, it was no longer really a thing where you had to explain what Zoom was to people. It was like
Mm.
it was a lot easier for people to understand that platform and being able to connect and yeah, like now it's kind of like a understood thing. So here you and I are talking, and I'm just sure that would have happened before. I think a lot of people just assumed everyone has to meet in person, and or it was just strictly by phone. But now here we are connecting and chatting, and so I'm looking forward to learning about you because you reached out to me about being on the show. And one of the things that stood out with it being on LinkedIn is that you have on your profile Tarot Alchemist, in dealing with depression in women. And the fact that you had Tarot Alchemist is not a title that you would normally see, quote unquote, on LinkedIn. So tell me more about that.
The Tarot Alchemist actually came from my business title, I guess,
Mhm.
which is also, of course, my professional title, is the Depression Muse. So, to give you a bit of background, I have had depression since childhood, in various degrees. Although back when I was a child, we didn't believe that kids could get depression.
Mm.
They were just, hyper or too emotional. All my life, I've been told I'm too emotional. Um, and I had some some pretty serious. I lost my father when I was 6. Some other close family members. So there was some pretty serious stuff going on for me when I was younger. Plus a gene factor. So I've been living with depression sometimes more successfully than others. I don't have a problem admitting. And I mean, now I'm in my early 50s. So I kind of refer to it as depression and I being old frenemies, really. I don't kind of know who I'd be without depression, but given the choice, I probably wouldn't be that keen to meet the demon, as I call it, as I did originally. So as I said, managed depression all my life. I've worked in mental health over 25 years now, because of course, well, not of course, but naturally for me, one of the things when I was learning how to manage my own depression is I wanted to help others do it. So I did that. I did a BA in psychology because I'm constantly fascinated by how people's brains work and how everybody does things differently, all the rest of it. So kind of fast forward to just a few years ago, when I had basically run out of options of becoming a parent. So I had to basically decide how I was going to manage the fact that I was never going to be a mother, which was always something I wanted to do. So I had to actively, and it was a very conscious decision for me, decide if I was going to basically allow the depression to just take over, to just give in and let it happen, or if I was going to find some way to cope with this. And I ended up by thinking, well, okay, if this was what my client was going through, how would I suggest that they manage this? And it took me back to something I had not done in recent years. It took me back to writing. I would have told a client, sit down, write out your feelings, write out your emotions. So that was essentially what I did, only I wasn't able at the time to write about my emotions about not being a mother. I just could not do it. I couldn't get it out verbally, and I couldn't get it out in the written word. And yet I always prefer writing actually to speaking. I feel like I express myself better when I'm writing. But I'm trying to keep this long story short. I'm not doing
No,
a good
this is
job.
what we're here for. Yeah, this is what we're here for, to hear about you and your story and your journey.
So I started writing a novel, and I started writing a vampire novel. I've always had a thing, I've always had a thing for vampires. And one of the things that annoyed me, once I got past the whole vampire romance stage, I couldn't find a decent vampire book out there for an adult to read. And I'd sworn since I was because when I was about 10 or 11, I was reading adult books. And I swore that I would one day write my own vampire novel. So that was what I did. I started writing this vampire novel just for fun. Well, not just for fun, but more as a therapy. And you're able to do a lot more when you write fiction. You're able to deal a lot with your emotions and your angst and all that stuff, because you just turn it into a character.
Look,
And then you get to
Aretha,
do
I
all
want you to see this encouragement here. Aretha says you're doing great. See, like I said, you're doing great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Aretha.
So once I started writing, I remembered how much I loved it. How I used to do it when I was a kid. When I was younger, I would write stories for fun. But of course, life had gotten in the way, and I hadn't done anything more about it. So when I was about halfway through the book, the first version of the book, I suddenly thought, this has really, really made a difference to me. And if it's made a difference to me, it'll make a difference to somebody else. And that was how the Depression Muse came about. And the Depression Muse, as me, is somebody who helps people with depression turn it into a creature of beauty. Actually, a creature of effing beauty, but I won't swear on here.
Gotcha.
So that was kind of where the Depression Muse came about. So that's what I do. I help people manage long-term depression, and I help them turn it into something beautiful. Because I'm a firm believer that, I mean, I don't know what it's like over there so much, but the mental health system that we have over here is all geared towards, you have depression, you must recover from it. And recover really over here means you must get rid of it. You must stop doing it. No more depression. We're getting rid of it. That's just not realistic. There are a few people out there who have a bout of depression and they never have another, but they're very few. Most of us, once you've got depression, it's going to keep coming back, biting you on the bum when you least expect it. So in my opinion, it's a much better idea to use the depression Use it to fuel a passion to create a fulfilling life for yourself, because the depression starts to rob you of that. So through the depression muse, one of the tools that I use to manage my own depression is tarot. And I use the tarot cards as a personal tool, not in a divination way so much, more as a prompt, almost like a journal prompt. You can use the tarot cards, the visual aspects of the tarot card. Whatever pops out to you as you're using a tarot card, as you're looking at a tarot card, is what your subconscious, and I believe your guides, is telling you, this is your issue here. You need to deal with this today. And by doing that, you manage to start the process of turning the depression into a creature of effing beauty. And that to me is alchemy. The process of alchemy is taking one thing and turning it to the other, into the other. I mean, the first alchemists were taking lead and turning it into gold. I kind of think I do the same thing. I take depression and I turn it into beauty.
Yes.
And that's where the tarot alchemist came along. I mean, I do, and you know, there are plenty of people that do tarot readings. Some for divination, although a good tarot reader won't do it specifically for, you know, telling your future. But a tarot alchemist takes it just that one step further. It's more than a reading. It's an insight into what's going on, and in the terms of depression, what's triggering you, what can help you, and it gives you something else to focus on, which is also a good, to my mind, a good thing for people with depression as well. I mean, when you go into a therapy session, you're there to talk, and absolutely that's great. I have done you know, therapy myself, and it has certainly been one of the things that's basically kept me alive. But with tarot alchemy, it's not just about the talk. It's about moving a journey. One of the things I do, for example, I'm creating a program which I'm going to release in a week or so. And one of the things that I offer in that is we do an in-depth study of each tarot card. And one of the things I do is an recorded guided meditation with the tarot card. So it takes you on a little journey with the tarot card just to see that where that takes you.
So are you doing both the major and the minor arcana cards?
I am. I
Okay.
am. I'm doing both. I'm doing them. They'll be offered separately, simply because there's such a lot in a tarot deck. And breaking them up, I think, you know, we'll just make it more bite-sized for people to be able to manage, because this stuff's overwhelming. And when you've got depression, it's just, you know, too much. You've got to keep a fine balance of, okay, yes, I can manage this, but if you take me one step over there, I'm lost. This is too much for me.
Yeah.
So it'll be in two pieces. It'll be the major arcana and the minor arcana. And some people may feel up to doing both at once. I would advise against it. I think you should do one at a time. But, you know, I'm a firm believer in you manage your depression your way, not the way that you are told you must.
Right. So what does that look like for Fiona? Because like I said, I think a lot of people use this word depression, and it's an overarching kind of thing. So what does depression look like for Fiona when it's like when it's, you know, being managed well versus I have depression, but it's not inhibiting my
depression for me is, and part of it is too, I've lived with it for so long, that it is a massive part of me. And I consider that I've got mine well managed. And I mean, I manage it with medication, with meditation, with just life skills I've developed over the years, because when you live with something so long, you get to know how to manage it.
Mm-hmm.
For me, a good day is when I'm doing my self-care, when I get up and I do my spiritual work and I do my self-care, and then I go through my day, without too much of a swerve, I guess, of highs and lows kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that I'm, mulling along just feeling bored or anything. I'm absolutely not. I still feel emotions, but they're not. I can tell where the emotion's coming from. I think perhaps that's the difference. If I get to a point where I'm feeling a bit upset, I can tell where that's coming from. When I'm in the midst of a bout of depression, there's none of that happening. I had a bout just a couple of weeks ago, which lasted about 2 or 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
And I managed to get myself out of bed and I got dressed and then I just lay on the bed and that was it. It's a feeling of, and yeah, I mean, I agree. You hear people say, oh, I'm so depressed. But when you actually have depression, you know the difference.
Yeah.
Clinical depression comes with I wouldn't even call it a sadness. Sadness is part of it, but the overall overarching feeling is more a complete numbness. There's just no life. It's like The Walking Dead. And I have always been lucky in my depression in that I've never been actively suicidal. For me, one of my major symptoms is, or my major traits really is, I can't make a decision at all. I just cannot. And, deciding that I was going to kill myself is too many decisions. I would have to decide to do it, find the energy to do it, figure out how I'm going to do it. And I'm not capable of doing that. I am, however, what they now call passively suicidal, I believe is the latest term for it. Whereas if I could just go off to sleep and not wake up, that'd be great. So it's a feeling of complete and utter despair and hopelessness, which again doesn't even cover it. It is so distinctly different from being miserable. But actually explaining it is really, really tricky. Because the thing is, too, your brain's not working. It's not just a mood thing. And then there are other symptoms with depression, which often get kind of lost within the whole mood. I mean, when you're lying around crying and that's all you can do, that's the symptom that people see. But there's others. I mean, your brain just doesn't work properly. You can't make a decision. Your brain just can't do it. And if you don't make a decision, it's probably not the right one, because these brain cells just aren't clicking over the way they should be. It's just not happening. Things like forgetfulness. I quite often tell the story. I walked out in front of a bus once. And I'll never forget the look on the bus driver's face. He got a hell of a fright, obviously. I just walked out because I forgot to look. I was just moving and I forgot to look for traffic. And this is for us, is a big city, Wellington, and it was in the central business district. But my brain wasn't working enough to say, look for traffic. Something that is automatically ingrained in us. Once we get to a certain age, we look for traffic. We don't think about it. Those things are lost when you have depression. Your brain can't do it. Just can't do it.
So how do you trust yourself?
Well, that's it. That's it. That is the hard part. I actually created a video around this because it's very difficult to know when your emotions are your own and when your emotions are a symptom of the depression. I find that the best way to do it or the most successful way, I think, is that you make the most of when your brain's working. You make the most of those good bouts. Because if you can get stuff in place for those good bouts, they will
Mhm.
carry you through the ones that aren't.
Mm.
I mean, this previous bout, this one that I had just recently, wasn't anywhere near as frightening for me as the others have been, because I'm at a point where, I mean, I knew it was coming. I felt it was coming. I knew it was coming. I fought it for ages. And one day or one morning, for whatever reason, it became too hard. So I just stopped fighting and let it take over.
Mm.
But I still had that little bit in my brain. It certainly wasn't conscious, but there was a bit in my brain that said, oh, this is just depression. Just write it out.
Mm.
But if I hadn't had the experiences of those good times, those good days when I'd, done all the research and looked into it and knew myself well enough to know, if I hadn't done those, it might have been completely different. And that's, I think, partly why it's so dangerous for younger people who have depression, or if they're
Mm.
in their first or second bout. And this is why one of the reasons I believe that the suicide rate is so high globally is because when you haven't had it for a while, like when you haven't had the experience of it for a while, you're not at that point where you can say to yourself, okay, this is just depression, keep yourself safe, ride it out.
Yeah.
Um, because it's a dreadful, dreadful feeling. It truly is. Um, yeah, yeah.
So, with that, because I know you're married. I read that in your
Mhm.
description. So between just like the relationships and they're interacting, how how is it best to interact and serve and care for you when you're going through those things? When you have, friends or, colleagues, like what is it?
Mm. Everybody's different. I find for me, leave me alone. I just want to be left alone. At the same time,
I'm
don't
about to say
really want
because
to leave
that
me alone.
because yeah, because that's like the opposite of what people would think is that
That's right.
no, I don't want to leave you alone. So
That's right. It's a fine line. And I mean, my husband's been dealing with this with me, for the time that we've been together. And I think menopause helped because Richard learned, okay, some days just leave it, leave it.
uh-huh.
Um, so I think that you have to make sure that somebody's physically safe. I mean, that is
Yeah.
the first thing. You have to make sure that they're physically safe. So that means things like, I mean, the biggest fear that anybody has with somebody who's depressed is that they will kill themselves. So there
Mhm.
needs to be, in my opinion, there needs to be conversations about that when people are well. There needs to be conversations about when you're ill, what do I do that will help you to
Mhm.
stop you from doing something like that to yourself? Um, but some of that gets lost when you're in the midst of dealing with somebody you love in pain, particularly when it's a pain that you can see no reason for. Um,
Mhm.
and I mean, what my husband does is he will, just as I said, make sure I'm safe. Um, and that can mean sometimes hiding the kitchen knives.
Mhm.
For some people, that can mean that. It can mean watching you take your medication just to make sure that A, you are taking it, B, you're taking it properly, and C, you're not taking too much of it. Um, Somebody else will also know um, when you need professional help, when you need to get to help. And the thing is, too, you do need somebody fighting in your corner sometimes, particularly in our mental health system, which is so overworked and just so wrong in so many ways.
Mhm.
You're not going to get help the first time you ask for somebody. You're going
Yeah.
to have to keep fighting. So if you're supporting somebody who's living with depression, you need to fight for them. You need to do that. You also need to protect yourself. So you need to make sure that you're okay. You need to have those conversations. If you're concerned that somebody's going to kill themselves, you ask them, are you thinking about killing yourself? Um, because this is it's the biggest fear, and it's how, I mean, there are many reasons why our suicide rate is so high, but that's one of them. People are afraid to have these conversations. We feel that if we talk about it, we're going to put the idea in your head. Trust
Right.
me, you are not. If you are dealing with a bout of depression, you have thought about dying. Whether actively or passively, you've thought about it because you want this pain to go away. So don't be frightened to have those conversations. And don't be frightened to say, I can't deal with this. But the thing with that is, if you can't deal with that, then you have to find somebody who can. Um, it's not easy. There's no two, and it's why so many relationships split up, obviously, is because it's not easy. It goes on and on and on, and it's very hard to communicate with somebody who can't get out of their own head. So there's no kind of easy way around it. There are ways that you can make it easier, and that's having those conversations when you're well. Because very few people are in the depths of a depressive episode 24/7 for months on end. There are some days that are better than others, and you have to catch those moments and talk about them.
Well, that's definitely one of the principles we're talking about, talking wisely, the words that we say and connecting with that. And I think that's very pivotal of talking about it when you're in that well stage, because I can see how they can easily be like, let's not talk about it because you're well, let's not deal with it. But then when you are experiencing that, like you said, it's not probably the best time to figure out
No.
the tactics of when this is coming and doing, all of that. So um yeah, definitely talking about that and the fear that people can have talking about, you
Mm,
know, death.
me too.
Um so that even comes to mind as we wrap up and we think about, that comes to mind, the I know one of the tarot cards is the death card. So tell me, how do you, kind of deal with that in your business, like in that particular card? I would love to hear your insight on that one.
One of the things that I struggle with as far is the fact that in our society we don't like people to be upset. We don't like
Mhm.
people to be miserable, hurt, angry. That's human nature, and it's a kindness, and that's lovely. But you know what? There's not actually anything wrong with people being upset with things that
Mm,
are upsetting. You know, we're so frightened of this. Oh, you mustn't feel like that. Don't cry. Here, do this. No,
mhm,
you can be upset. And this is another thing too with people with depression. People with depression are sometimes thought of as they can't get upset. They
mhm,
can't just be upset with things, they're depressed. No, you can have, you could be perfectly reasonably upset. And the thing with the death card is, to me, the death card really signifies change. And it signifies major change. It's not just a minor, oh, I'm going to have, I don't know, Wheat Bix for breakfast instead of cornflakes. It's a
mhm,
major, it's in the major arcana because it's a major change. And with major changes, something has to end before something begins. That's just the way it works. There's no room. Something has to end before something begins. And there are many, many things in this world that we are happy to end.
mm,
But when we see that figure of death on the tarot card, it's that immediate fear comes in. And there's no need for it. The death card is about change, and change is a good thing.
So, one of the decks that I have, as I was connecting with your energy, we were talking about the whole death, and it literally it came out with the trigger is that I'm scared.
Yep.
And a lot of times, I know that is definitely one of the things that people have, or the experience that I am scared. But the true statement says, is when I am vulnerable, I am at my strongest. And it says to reconnect with your feminine energy and pursue something that ignites your fire, open the gates of your fortress and explore.
Exactly. And that is the whole thing that the Depression Muse and Tarot Alchemy is about. It's about taking that dreadful, dreadful demon depression and turning it into something beautiful. And
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
that's just it in a nutshell.
Yeah, so as Ruthie was saying, is I'm so glad you said that. She said it's okay to be upset about things that are upsetting. Yes, it's
Mm,
okay to be scared, but just and that's just an emotional feeling of vulnerability at that time. But then I had also pulled about okay, what is like the thing about living smart with that, and the energy that came was the whole first chakra root that when you're scared, usually it has something to do with that, that you're not feeling solid, you're not feeling cared for and safe, which is very much connected to that, the root chakra. So
yeah.
encouraging people to do those things that are helping them to get well and what that looks like for them. Thank you so much for sharing what that looks like, for you, and the fact that you are then taking that experience and using it to
Mm,
coach others. And as we often say, is that we generally coach in areas that has impacted us because
mm,
we've been there, we can experience that. And I definitely believe that hashtag, as I say, coaches have coaches. So
yeah.
it's when you have someone that has that experience, it's not as though we have to be perfect in that and like we have it all figured out and saved, which is where when I was thinking about this whole superwoman when you were talking, is that you were strong enough to admit that yeah, I just had about like a couple days ago,
Mm,
but here I am being honest and vulnerable and sharing that. But then I knew it was coming. I knew what to do. I had all of my stuff in place to now here we are talking and sharing that experience with others with that. And so I'm so glad that you came on the show to talk about that because you know this conversation is literally what awe is all about. Awe definitely means wonder, respect, and fear all intertwine, together. And how do you manage all of that? And those are things that definitely people can have those feelings about depression, about tarot cards, about how do I live with this and excel with that. So thank you for coming and sharing with
thank
me
you
and
for
for
having me. Yeah.
absolutely. It has been a pleasure. And thank you so for our live watchers and for those that will watch on the replay. Please connect with us on LinkedIn if you want to follow up and have these conversations. And until we meet again next week for my next guest, thank you, Fiona, so much for sharing with us. If you just hold on as we just play the outro here. And